Thank you, Paul. Thanks for being a part of the program again, and you've been with us for years and president of the Rio Grande Foundation. And tell us about the philosophy of your foundation and how it impacts New Mexico.
Yeah, we are a nonprofit, 501c3, nonpartisan public policy research organization dealing with New Mexico economic and education policies. We also cover constitutional liberties, both state constitution and U.S. Constitution. Our philosophy is one of limited government and individual liberty.
So, with that in mind, how would you rank New Mexico?
On individual liberty, we actually score relatively highly on a lot of measures. In fact, the Rio Grande Foundation worked with a bipartisan coalition back in the Martinez administration to achieve civil asset forfeiture reform. It's a hugely problematic legal process where police can just take something, even if it's not you breaking the law, it's somebody using your stuff, breaking the law. And
with your vehicle, with your car.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that was reformed. New Mexico became a national leader on that front.
So the government just couldn't take your car and not give it back to you.
Exactly. And that's part of our constitutional mission. I would say our primary job is reforming New Mexico's economy. And unfortunately, that's the most frustrating area of our work because the politicians in Santa Fe like spending the money. They don't like returning it to New Mexicans, except for maybe in a rebate kind of thing. They don't want to broadly reform the economy. But the other one, education, if there's a dashboard of New Mexico and we're flying along maybe, there is a red light just bright, shining, flashing, klaxons going off. There should be, at least when it comes to New Mexico's education system. And that's something that, again, very frustrating to see what's happening in Santa Fe.
We spend a lot of money. What percentage of our budget goes to education? Maybe 50%?
Just under 50%, in terms of the K-12.
Goes from our taxpayers' pockets to the education system.
And again, a lot of that money comes from the oil and gas industry. We had
But it keeps growing.
Yeah.
So Senator Ortiz-Pino said, well, with crime, and I relate it to education, the drugs are a problem concerning crime, but that can relate to families because the parents aren't getting the kids ready for school. And
there's a lot of challenges when it comes to our school system. There's no question that we have a lot of problems. But
so how could it be reformed? How could it be improved? Again, we're giving half of our money to education. Right. Year after year, it grows, but improvement isn't seen. What can be done?
And just to give you a quick explanation of how things are, obviously New Mexico was very locked down during COVID. The governor kept New Mexico children out of school for over a year, and the virtual schooling didn't work very well. So the most recent report that came out, and New Mexico's always faced challenges with education, but this National Assessment of Educational Progress came out in October of 2022. So it's not very old. This is the nation's report card. That's what it's billed as, and I think it is. It's given to a statistically representative sample of students across the country, including right here in New Mexico. And we came in dead last in every single category. 4th grade reading, 4th grade math, 8th grade reading, 8th grade math. And we have a desperate need for reform in the state of New Mexico of our education system. There's a lot of different approaches. Partially due to COVID, school choice has become really predominant. Arizona, money following the student is the philosophy that they've taken up.
Have they?
Other states, yes, that's education savings accounts is the way that a lot of states are doing things, and basically splitting up a large portion of the education budget, and instead of the money flowing to the bureaucracies, it flows to the families, and they get to choose the education model that works for them.
This has been happening across the country.
It has. This has been the greatest upsurge in school choice, really, in our nation's history, because I think people, parents especially, realized that what was happening in our education system during COVID, it wasn't necessarily for the benefit of the kids. Now, New Mexico, we're a way off from doing that kind of broad-based choice, but other states are racing ahead. West Virginia, Florida, it's almost too many to name. Iowa, Tennessee, all these states are embracing that kind of reform. But the good news is that there are alternatives that may be a little more politically palatable to folks. And I want to commend Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino. He hasn't embraced full-fledged school choice in the sense that all the money follows the student. He has embraced a tax credit for school choice model. He's been in the legislature a long time. I've been at my job for a long time. We actually worked with Senator Ortiz-Pino on a tax credit scholarship bill. He introduced it in the last session after years of not doing it. It got its way out of its first committee, but unfortunately, the unions control Santa Fe.
What would have happened with this bill?
It would have allowed individuals or businesses to donate some money, take a credit against their state taxes. Money goes to a 501c3 that creates scholarships for low income and needy kids, which in New Mexico, something like 75% of the kids qualify as low income and needy.
And they could have taken that credit, that scholarship, and gone to then maybe a private school.
Exactly. That would have been very much up that idea. That's been done in maybe a dozen states. It's not the current education cutting edge. The education savings accounts are, but we would have been very happy to see that pass. And it's Senator Ortiz-Pino is retiring after one more session. We'll see if he even pushes it into 30-day coming up. But my point is that there is another model out there, and it's a model pursued by none other than Mississippi. Now, you and I, we've been around New Mexico. We've heard people more than once say, thank God for Mississippi. Well, we can't thank God for Mississippi anymore because Mississippi is kicking our butts educationally. What they did is really focus on early childhood learning. A lot of the reforms that Susana Martinez pushed didn't get through the legislature, but phonics-based learning, teaching teachers how to teach, and really hyper-focusing on making sure that they teach and are qualified to teach phonics-based learning to the kids. Mississippi has moved from kind of dead last, like right alongside New Mexico, and they're middle of the pack now nationwide, and they've really done this on a sustainable but quick trajectory. Once the kids who were exposed to these reforms got into the fourth grade classrooms, they really moved the needle in the state of Mississippi.
So you're saying it's just a different approach to teaching. It's still public schools, or is it choice?
What I'm saying is that it's not choice. A lot of conservatives and free market people, that's their one-trick pony. And I'm a huge believer in school choice. This is not to denigrate school choice. This is to say that if the politics aren't there to get to choice, the Mississippi model is an alternative, and it's working through the current system, and it's got proven results right there in the state of Mississippi. So it's something we need to consider.
What did the legislature say about that during this session, about that Mississippi?
Our legislature did not directly tackle that. In fact, our unfortunately, public education department in New Mexico is kind of in chaos. We've had a governor for 4 years, 4.5 years, 5 education secretaries. There are efforts underway to make sure that teachers are taught how to teach reading, and that affects every other
And again,
area.
we're thinking they already knew this, correct?
Right.
As a parent of a student, you're thinking, well, the teacher took 4 years of college to be an educator, that they learned how to teach kids to read.
Yeah, and I'm not really an expert on what goes on in colleges of education, but let's just say that there are philosophies and approaches that don't have a lot to do with teaching the most critical subject of all. Because even in math class, if you're sitting in front of a word problem and you don't know what the words on the paper say, you're not going to be able to solve that word problem in a math class. So you really need to have your reading skills. And the idea during Martinez's time, and we worked with her administration on that, the idea in Mississippi is if you can't read by 4th grade, you are probably on the dropout train. There are interventions that can happen, but you don't want to get to that point. You want to make sure all the kids can read at 4th grade. One of the things they did in Mississippi that we talked about a lot here is abandoning 3rd grade social promotion, abandoning just passing kids along even though we know they don't read, because all you're doing is setting them up for failure down the road.
I'd heard previous sessions discussing that. Was it discussed this session much?
No.
Previous I've
really,
heard.
there was not much except for more spending in the pre-K that was passed in the permanent fund. There's one good solid thing that did happen in this legislative session on education. We have something called a 529 plan. They're a federal tax positive plan, that's structured plan that allows people to take a break for money they put aside for college. Trump changed that when he was president. I think Congress did this in one of those tax bills. And what they did is they said, you can now use that for K-12 educational choice if you have a 529 plan. It's money put aside, tax-free at the federal level and the state level as well. And so you now have a law that just passed in New Mexico to allow greater use of and flexibility of those 529 plans. So that's
which is a tax break.
Yes, and it was passed bipartisan. It went through very easily. It was something that you have to pass compliance legislation at the state level in order to make it happen. And we were slow, but we finally got around to it. And this is a form of educational choice and freedom. So
That passed this past session.
Yeah.
So do the parents ever have to pay taxes on that money once it's spent on education,
No.
or no?
No.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's something.
That's they're able to save taxes on their own money that they put aside. Of course, they're already paying taxes for public schools, but they're able to save tax money on money that they've saved for a different choice.
Yeah, and could be grandma or grandpa or somebody else can put money into that account as well and get the
Something that didn't pass that you were concerned, the Rio Grande Foundation was concerned about, was a governor's authority to have control over their state in an emergency situation. The current governor had control, emergency powers seemed endless, that effect.
Yeah.
Without the government, without the legislature, the representative of the people having an input. Of course, she was elected by the people as well, but the individual districts and representative had no say on those emergency powers.
Right, and that's part of our constitutional mission to make sure that when it comes to governance in the state of New Mexico, that we have balance of power in our government. You know, the founding fathers at the national level, of course, Congress is supposed to be the most powerful, the primary lawmaking body, the governor signing bills, issuing, the executive functions of government, and then the courts kind of calling balls and strikes. Well, that's the same model we have at the state level, of course, but the legislature had essentially, in an emergency situation, abdicated control over anything the governor did. And even if this legislature, which is of course Democrat controlled, just like the governor, went along with what happened, and we were in an emergency, by the way, for COVID from March 11th of 2020, and it ended at March 31st of 2023. So over 3 years of an emergency with no challenges seriously considered by the legislature. So bills were introduced, constitutional amendments were introduced as well, but they all died every session. And the Democrats who control the legislature just were not interested in holding this governor accountable. Now, the founding fathers set up our government along the lines of all of these entities being jealous of their power, that they were going to be more concerned about, the checks and balances and holding on to their institutional power. Unfortunately, the way it's worked out, both parties are guilty of this, but in the United States, there's much more party loyalty. There's not much institutional loyalty, and that's exactly what we've seen, is that Democrats don't want to jump on board with something. By and large, there's been a few who have willingly introduced and gone along with the idea of limiting the governor's power, basically saying after a 45-day emergency declaration, the legislature should vote up or down on whether to continue with this.
But why wouldn't they? I mean, we're not talking about the current governor, but future. I mean, if future, why would they not do it? Why would they not look at the Constitution, look at their own powers and say, we represent our districts, our individuals who voted for us. 45 days of one person making decisions for the entire state should be long enough. Why?
You would think. Well, why has the bureaucracy in Washington grown? Because Congress And the legislature is in the same boat philosophically. They say, why do we want to stick our heads up, stick our necks out for X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. In Washington, it might be an environmental regulation. Here in the state of New Mexico, it might be some COVID rule or some future emergency rule. They would rather just let the governor take the reins and step back and say, we're a part-time legislature, we can't, or we'll be held responsible. So I think
is that okay?
even if they kept the emergency in place, it would be good to have the data, the discussion, the news coverage, and a final vote to show who is supporting this ongoing emergency. And the education area, it comes back to that because we had those kids out of school for over a year. We had policies being made and discussed here in New Mexico and across the country by governors, by and large, who were not so much beholden to the legislators. And those legislators are closer to the people. They have to be a little more accountable, and they should be standing up for the parents and the families. So unfortunately, that little system is just not functioning correctly in New Mexico.
Could have been a constitutional amendments to allow the voters to vote, but they still didn't want to take responsibility to make the decisions, it sounds like?
So, we have a constitutional process, so bills or constitutional amendments were introduced into that process, and what could have happened is because the Constitution can be amended without the governor signing off on it. It circumvents the governor. They would have been able to do that. But again, partisan loyalty wins out. And I just think that this whole situation would have been very different had Susana Martinez or Gary Johnson, Republicans, been in the governor's mansion. I think the watchdog role of the legislature would have been embraced in a far different way. There would have been a lot more interest among the legislature in weighing in on some of these issues under a Republican administration than there was during a Democrat administration. And ultimately, aside from the businesses which closed and were affected by those policies, the kids were the most single impacted group in our state. And it's definitely one of the reasons that all the information I just shared with you about our terrible performance on the NAEP test, that is part of the issue, is that they were prohibited from going into the schools for over a year.
And there is the voice of the other people in New Mexico, again, who voted for all of these, that they were grateful to the governor for closing the state down. There's that side too. And again, they went to the polls and continued voting.
You're right. They obviously voted for those policies to continue, and that's unfortunate. Even if you think it was a good idea, that the governor did everything exactly right, which I think the science tends to have shifted in a way to call that to question. But even if you thought it was all done flawlessly, the legislature should still be there offering their insights, hearing data and information.
To be heard from, because they're speaking on our behalf.
Exactly.
What else? We have a few more minutes. Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation. Would you like to share about this past session and going forward?
Yeah. Well,
lost opportunities or positive opportunities. Are you concerned about the crime in our state?
I am, but I'm going to talk to you about something different from crime that's more up our alley from a policy standpoint, which is the medical provider shortage. That's something that we've done a lot of research on. I'm less well versed on the ins and out of crime issues, but
the health, our health is important, and anybody who's tried to make an appointment knows they can't get in to see their primary, they can't get in to see a specialist.
Yeah. So in 2021, and I'm condensing things for the purposes of discussing this. There's a lot of back and forth that happened, but in 2021, a law was passed that took certain clinics, non-hospital clinics, and dramatically increased their liability under medical malpractice. This is if a doctor does something wrong or irresponsible and it causes harm. They went from $750,000 to $5 million as the cap. And the insurance companies who are ultimately paying the bill and the doctors paying their premiums on that insurance, those insurance companies said, well, we're not coming to New Mexico because that's a huge increase. We're not going to cover these doctors. So the doctors said, holy cow, we're not going to be covered. We're going to leave the state. And there are a lot of other reasons why New Mexico is a challenging state for doctors. We have a huge proportion of Medicaid patients in the state, almost half the people in the state are on government Medicaid, which doesn't pay out at the same rate. So anyway, getting all of that to the point is this was kind of reaching ahead in this session. If they didn't do anything, this new law was taking effect at the beginning of 2024, and we were going to have a serious doctor shortage in New Mexico. So
the new law of
the 2021 law, yes, the higher cap. So to her credit, Governor Lujan Grisham, after 53 days of this session, so basically a week left, you're talking about kind of, I watched football back in the day. They had the Alcoa Fantastic Finishes where someone led them on a drive, to a last-minute victory. That's kind of what happened here. The Democrats, to be clear, were the ones killing all of the medical malpractice reforms in first committee. They were standing up for the trial attorneys, not the doctors and not the patients of New Mexico. Just a fact. And here we were, almost to the end of the session. Finally, the governor got the Democrats in the room and said, guys, we need to do this. And so a bill was put forth, bipartisan basis. It was a dummy bill, so it's a new piece of legislation with a week left in the session to limit from $5 million back to $1 million, indexing it to inflation. $1 million is a lot closer to $750,000 is to $5 million, and they got that done. Flew through the legislative session, and it's now the law of the land. So it's not going to solve all of our problems. Of course, the gross receipts tax issue with deductibles and copays. Now, when you pay your doctor cash, they won't be taxed on the back end of that. That's another thing that happened this session. That is two good things. Unfortunately, our state continues to push this idea of putting everybody on Medicaid and expanding that government program, which again pays doctors a tiny fraction of what they're charging other providers, other insurance companies, even other government programs. So we need to do something about Medicaid. Unfortunately, we're looking at going in the opposite direction. We do need innovative and really well thought out approaches to attracting more doctors to New Mexico and keeping them here. And we made some progress, but we have a very long way to go in New Mexico. We all know the state is aging. The people who are coming here, the people who are staying here tend to be older and are going to need a lot more medical care. The people who are leaving, and unfortunately not many people are having large families in New Mexico, those people, there are just not enough kids, and those are not people who need as much medical services and are as dependent on doctors. So we are in still a very challenging situation here that needs to be addressed.
Aren't we giving scholarships to a lot more medical professionals to come to our state to study and to stay in our state for a couple of years after?
There were efforts made to increase Medicaid payments, increase the number of doctors who are training here at, for example, UNM Hospital, and coming here, and especially going into rural communities, because that's where the real crisis is. As long as we're here in Albuquerque, there's challenges, but if you're in Gallup or Jal or rural parts of New Mexico, Clayton, you often can't even find just basic coverage for a lot of the health issues that you might have. So you come all the way to Albuquerque, and that's a challenge, or go over across the state line to Texas or Arizona or some other state. So this is another mixed bag issue. It's a self-inflicted issue going back to 21, because not only do we have that bill being passed, but New Mexico's notoriously plaintiff-friendly state. We have juries that tend to side with the people who are allegedly being ripped off or harmed by those mean and nasty rich doctors. But we need those doctors. We very much need to not just keep the ones we have, but maintain efforts to get more doctors in here, because we have also, in addition to our aging population, we have an aging doctor population, and so that's
they're retiring.
A lot of problems.
They have a right to retire, but when you find out, oh, your doctor's retiring, okay, finding a new one is difficult. Paul, in the minute or so we have left, is there something you can tell viewers that they could share, some mindset of wake up, look what's happening. I mean, elections have consequences, and if you want to continue to see high taxes and the government dictating your life, is there something they should be thinking differently about? Or do they like the handouts? Do they like, that's the problem. Handouts are hard to take back. Once you get it, get a taste of that free, it doesn't give you authority or liberty over your life or control.
Totally agree. I would say that from our perspective, because we are an educational focused organization, not just on the policy of education, but on educating the public, one of the tools that we have put together and I think is beneficial for people in finding out how their legislators are voting on these issues is the Freedom Index that we use to track legislative votes. RioGrandeFoundation.org, click on Freedom Index at the top of the page. What we do is we assign vote totals, numbers anywhere from -8 for a bad bill or +8 for a good bill that expands your economic freedom, expands your educational choice, protects your constitutional liberties, all those things that should be universally beloved and acceptable.
But you immediately found that on your index. And again, RioGrandeFoundation.org is the place
and
to
you can find out how your legislators are performing on that index.
Who you voted for.
Exactly.
Or not. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks to Paul Gessing with the Rio Grande Foundation. I'm Diane Kinderwater. Make it a great week with your family. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.